Focus on Iran's push to build nuclear weapons, which I believe presents one of the most immediate and acute threats to American national security. Under the first Trump administration, President Trump imposed maximum pressure, first by denying the Ayatollah oil revenue, then rescinding civil nuclear waivers, and ultimately by invoking UN snapback sanctions. The Biden administration dismantled that pressure, as the Iranian regime knew that they would, and so the regime began rushing to a nuclear weapon immediately after the November election. We know the result. Today, the Ayatollah has achieved a nuclear breakout time of nearly zero. We now face the very real possibility of an Iranian nuclear arsenal. I do not believe this is a threat the U.S. can tolerate, and I'm glad that the Trump administration is taking action. We've already seen the Trump administration restore parts of the maximum pressure campaign with the goal of cutting their oil exports completely to zero. Next, we have to cancel any civil nuclear waivers and reinvoke the UN snapback. I asked in written testimony to this committee whether Secretary Rubio intends to do so, and here was his response, quote, "I believe it is our national security interest for the UN Security Council to snap back the sanctions that were suspended under the JCPOA. I will execute the President's guidance and work with our allies to ensure that snapback takes place." I also asked incoming Ambassador to the United Nations, Stefanik, about the issue, and she said she will work with the White House and Secretary Rubio to develop a strategy to do exactly that. Both said an Iranian nuclear weapon poses an acute national security threat to the United States. First, do you agree with their assessment that it is in the national security interest of the United States to snap back the UN sanctions?
Yes, Senator.
Talk about how you would work to support our UN mission, the State Department, and the administration, and in particular to invoke the UN snapback mechanism, either unilaterally or working with allies.
Senator, let me just take a step back and reiterate, I'm so glad that you bring up this really important issue of Iran's nuclear capabilities, because I think there are few more acute threats in the world today, and I think the President has made it clear on numerous occasions that he shares the view that you just articulated, that it is completely unacceptable to U.S. national security to have, for Iran to be a nuclear-armed power in this world. Certainly the State Department will do everything we can, as Senator Rubio and Representative Stefanik have indicated to you, to work with other countries around the world to make sure that they're not just U.S. sanctions on Iran, but that if an alliance means something, it's got to mean something that when we say something is an existential threat to the world, that our allies would agree with us and would act in conjunction. You can't just be allies for the things that the allies might care about. I mean, there are broader implications of things that we care about. And I think we should generally make it clear to our allies that if you want to be our allies, let's try to identify and work together on issues that we all care about in different parts of the world. And so Iran is certainly one of those.
Terrific. Mr. Whitaker, we've heard a lot of histrionics recently about President Trump's policies towards Europe and Ukraine. First, obviously and candidly, I've heard from colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky was an inexplicable catastrophe. What we witnessed was an outburst that was completely out of line, delusional, and frankly, deeply disrespectful to the President of the United States. In my view, President Zelensky's behavior in that meeting will go down in history as the most disastrous Oval Office encounter ever. Zelensky's behavior was the exact opposite of what he should have been doing. The United States has provided Ukraine with hundreds of billions of dollars to support its fight against Russia, and yet his attitude was arrogant, and his actions didn't just harm Ukraine, they also harmed America. In fact, President Zelensky played right into Putin's hands by setting back efforts to end the war quickly. Any outcome that benefits Russia does not benefit America. The war must end, I believe, with a clear and unmistakable loss for Russia. After the war ends, the next question is going to be what Europe does with energy. And as you and I discussed, energy was a major cause of the war, with Joe Biden waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2, which was the precipitating cause of the war. Two-part question. Number one, what is your understanding of why the war started? And number two, how should the issue of European energy security be handled? And should Europe get its energy from Russia or from America?
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator. I enjoyed our conversation. We've known each other for a long time, and it was good to not only catch up, but talk about these important issues that face our European allies and the NATO alliance that we're, a part of. First, it's very clear to me that when Joe Biden removed those sanctions from Nord Stream 2, that gave the money that Vladimir Putin needed to execute this war. It took away the need for Russian gas to pass through Ukraine because they had a new route for that gas straight to Central Europe. At the same time, Joe Biden's weakness in the Afghanistan withdrawal, I think, also gave a green light to Vladimir Putin to commence the war in 2022. So I think those two factors, as we discussed, were critical to that war, and it would have never happened if Donald Trump was president in 2022. There is no doubt to me that one of the reasons for the NATO alliance, it is, again, as I mentioned earlier, the most successful alliance in the history of the world. But it also protects our allies, and our allies should protect us. And that includes not only military alliances, but trade alliances. And the fact that Europe continues to buy billions of dollars worth of gas from Russia instead of buying American liquid natural gas, I think is just a travesty. And hopefully we can increase that capacity to export here in the U.S. and for them to receive it in Europe so that dependence on Russia and the funding of Vladimir Putin's war machine can end.
Very much agree. Thank you.